大丈夫ですかね。はい。Okay, so I'm going to start my presentation for today. So the presentation is based on the presentation I made at the American Studies Association meeting. So I would like to share what I have found out about this diary that was written within the Japanese American Tule Lake Segregation Center. Okay. And first, I would like to start my presentation by an advertisement of my book that was published in September last year. In this book, I wrote about how Japanese American incarceration left a historical legacy on the restriction of general civil liberties, not just of racial and other minorities, in the name of internal security and public safety. By first branding all Japanese Americans, or JAs, to be potentially disloyal to the United States, the government justified its draconian mass removal and incarceration of an ethnic group. But only a year and a half later, the government sorted out the disloyal from the loyal through a questionnaire and labeled the vast majority of JAs as loyal citizens. I argued that this process, the segregation of the disloyal and the integration of the rest, equipped the government with a new boundary between citizens who are entitled to freedom and those who could be rounded up and put away in concentration camp in post-war America. Hence, my book looks at the legislative process of the passage and repeal of the Emergency Detention Act of 1950, a law that authorized the government to detain anyone who is suspected to be potentially disloyal. While I decoded the discursive entanglement of ideas such as loyalty, freedom, and security in my book, I want to focus today on the concrete experiences of Japanese Americans detained in the Tule Lake Segregation Center, which housed those who were marked as disloyal to America. The question of loyalty becomes way more complex when dealing with transnational individuals, because one's loyalty to one country could mean one's disloyalty to the other when two nations are at war. I try to approach this complexity by looking at the body of the incarcerees in today's talk. Okay. Clem Albert's 1942 photograph titled Last Japanese Leave shows a Japanese American family being taken away in a military truck from their home in San Pedro, California. It depicts caged children staring out through the wooden frames. Like the cattle, JAs are herded into trucks and trains, which took them to their sites of confinement. In her paper titled Animality and Detainment for U.S. Security, Funi Su interrogates how borders between citizens and aliens, loyal Americans and disloyal enemies, and humans and non-humans are manifested through the mechanism of detainment. Albert's photograph, Su claims, quote, provides a visual representation of the uncertainty of life lived in that liminal space, unquote. She further writes, quote, not only did this form of detainment mark Japanese Americans who are legal citizens of the US as suspicious and perpetual foreigners, it also attempted to destabilize their humanity, unquote. The horse stalls in the assembly centers, Su writes, quote, created spatial and philosophical borders between what was inscribed as the human world of so-called loyal American citizens and the non-human animal realm of the incarcerated enemy, Japanese and Japanese Americans, unquote. Such photographs can convey the inhumane nature of the US policies of incarceration imposed most frequently upon the bodies of color. Jasmine Allender, in her book, Moving Images, 2009, interrogates the complex meaning of photographs and the act of taking photographs in the Japanese American wartime incarceration. Allender points out that the government-sponsored photographers, namely Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams, challenged the official justification of JA's incarceration as a national security measure and countered the dehumanizing images of enemy aliens. Toyo Miyatake's photographs, Allender argues, not only show the human side of the incarcerees, but reveals how Miyatake reclaimed the citizens' right of self-representation. Critical analysis of photographs have elucidated how incarcerated subjects' human gaze captured in the photos defy their dehumanization. But if thinking is the primary act of humans to be humans, I think, therefore I am, our analysis of the gaze of the incarcerated subjects in still photographs would not complete our understanding of the situation. It is still relevant to read the texts produced by the incarcerees, if available, which convey what the confined subjects were thinking and feeling while the process of dehumanization was manifested in their confined bodies, which we can see in the photographic evidence. JA incarceration studies have produced numerous non-textual analyses of the subject of confinement, while there have not been enough rigorous textual analyses of the incarcerees' contemporary writings written in Japanese. To understand the complex process of the incarcerees' dehumanization and their resistance and attempts for self-rehumanization, this paper juxtaposes the photographs of the so-called troublemakers in the Tule Lake Segregation Center with a prison diary written by Tatsuo Inoue, a Kibe Nisei who was detained in the Tule Lake stockade. This paper tries to decode Akibe incarceree's protest by looking at how Inoue talked back through his alien body and thought and fought back against his dehumanization through his reading and writing, the acts which defy any simplistic interpretations on the incarceree's citizenship and loyalty. Before I get into the content of the Tule Lake Stockade Diary, I would like to explain how I got hold of the material. In July 2013, the Japanese American National Museum sponsored a conference commemorating the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Liberties Act, which marked the federal government's redress agreement. I was invited to this conference to present on the wartime treatment of Japanese Canadians, which in some ways were even harsher than that of Japanese Americans. On the last day of the conference, I met Miss Nancy Kyoko Oda and Miss Ernie J. Masako Nishi. They told me that their father, Tatsuo Inoue, had kept a diary during the family's incarceration in Tule Lake Segregation Center and asked me if there was a possibility to publish the diary as their father had wished before he passed away. I asked them to digitize the handwritten diary into PDF files. My research team, including Nagatomi-san, who is present here, transcribed the diary and translated the part written in the stockade in which he was detained between November 13th, 1943 and February 14th, 1944. So we transcribed the whole Tule Lake diary, but only the stockade part was translated into English. In the meantime, the UCLA Asian American Studies Center agreed to post the diary, the English translation of the diary, on their open source website under the rubric of the Suyama Project. The Suyama Project was established on a donation named after Mr. Eiji Suyama, a Nisei veteran who believed in the importance of preserving the records of resistors in the JA incarceration history. The English translation of the diary is now available for the public to read and learn about the Tule Lake stockade. Next, I would like to explain the author of the diary. Tatsuo Ryusei Inoue was born in Los Angeles in 1910. He was sent to Japan when he was 3 years old and received education in Japan until he returned to the US in 1928, which makes him Kibe. He learned judo while in Japan and became a master practitioner. After he returned to the US, he became a Japanese language school teacher in Lancaster, California. He married Lily Yuriko Anise in 1932, and the family ran a grocery store in Los Angeles. He had two daughters, Frances Sayuri and Ernie Jane Masako, when the war started. He was one of the highest ranking judo teachers in California and took part in the judo demonstration in the Los Angeles Olympic Games in 1936. His FBI file shows that he was a dual citizen. He answered no to question 27 of the loyalty questionnaire, which asked if he was willing to serve in the US military. He answered neutral to question 28, which inquired whether he would give unconditional allegiance to the United States and forswear his loyalty to the Japanese emperor. The family moved from post-war relocation center to Tule Lake Segregation Center as a result of his no and neutral answer in October 1943. He was detained in the stockade, a prison inside a prison camp, for 3 months, starting in November 13, 1943. In May 1945, the third daughter, Nancy Kyoko, was born. After the war, the family resettled in Los Angeles. The Tule Lake Stockade Diary needs to be understood in the context of the confusion and disorder which resulted from the poor crisis management on the part of the War Relocation Authority at the face of the real unrest and imagined threat induced by the pro-Japan faction in the camp. Conrad Adler's film, Resistance at Tule Lake, 2018, explains how the oppressive control adopted by the administration heightens the tension between the administrators and incarcerees. In mid-October 1943, a farm truck overturned coming back from the field, and one man died and several were injured. In late October, beating incidents frequently occurred. On October 25th, farm workers started a strike. On November 1st, upon the WRA director Dillon Meyer's visit, a delegation committee demanded improvement in the camp's living conditions. The camp director Raymond Best rejected the demands, and a crowd gathered around the administration office. Rumors went around the camp that the camp food was stolen by the staff. Weary of the growing unrest, Director Best called in the military. Tanks and soldiers with bayonets roamed through the camp. The army searched the barracks, confiscating food and valuable goods. On November 14th, the army enforced martial law, and this was one day after Tatsuo Inoue was taken away from his family and detained in the stockade. Inoue was picked up most likely because some informants gave his name to the FBI since he was a well-respected Kibe judo master. And there is no photograph of Inoue in the stockade, but this picture is a very famous picture of the stockade in Tule Lake. And this, the person in front is Itaru Ina, who was also a Kibe, and he is the Satsuki Ina, Dr. Satsuki Ina's father, and Satsuki Ina right now is very active in the anti-incarceration movement and anti-separation of the immigrants' children, and so she is a very famous person. So this photograph is a very famous one of Tule Lake Stockade. Okay. The FBI record of Inoue's interrogation shows that the agent understood that Inoue was neither a threat to the camp internal security nor a pro-Japan agitator. Nonetheless, he was detained for 3 months, and the reason for his detention was never explained during and or after the war. Inoue recorded every meal served in the stockade, and the diary vividly describes how the quality and quantity of food deteriorated as the tension heightened, not only in the stockade, but in the whole camp. The living condition in the stockade worsened as more and more people were picked up and brought in. So this is the page of the diary, December 18th, and it shows like asa, kohi, toast, hiru, gohan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the examples. November 14th, 1943, this is the day he was taken to the stockade. 3 fried eggs, morning 3 fried eggs, this is the next day. Morning 3 fried eggs, coffee, bread, cornflakes. Noon, lettuce, raisin, coffee, cake, spare ribs, biscuits, bread. Evening, macaroni, rice, mashed potatoes, coffee, bread, peaches. And he said this was the best meal that he had since the family was brought to Tule Lake. December 2nd, 1943. Morning, pancake, coffee. Noon, rice, scrambled egg, 1 tablespoon. Tea. Evening, rice, macaroni mixed with carrots, beets without vinegar, and tea. December 20th, 1943. Morning, coffee, bread. Noon, rice, nimono, corned beef, and potato, 1 full teaspoon, 2 pieces of beets. Evening, rice, broiled salted mackerel, tea. And it says they supplied 76 mackerels for 200 people and told us to use them for 2 meals. There were only 8 latrines in the stockade for over 200 inmates. Inoue could only shower once in several days. The latrines always had a line because everybody was constipated. A flu broke out and many became sick. On December 21st, the camp residents sent support food, which the detainees enjoyed for a couple of days. However, on Christmas Eve, only bread and water was served. The day after Christmas, the soldiers threw bread on the ground and ordered the inmates to pick them up and serve as food. The inmates refused and no other food was supplied. The detailed account of violence, starvation, and sickness in the diary matches the photographic images of Tule Lake Stockade. The tension between the inmates and the army climaxed when the 25-year-old man transferred from Hawaii died of illness in the camp hospital, and his friend's request to have the funeral inside the stockade was rejected. The inmates voted and decided to go on a collective hunger strike. The strike failed after 6 days. Inoue did not lead the strike, but he was bitterly disappointed by this failure because it showed the inmates' spiritual weakness, which was a shame for a Japanese. He wrote in his diary that any hardship should be bearable if one thought about the Imperial Japanese soldiers in the battlefield in the Pacific. Inoue never joined Hokoku Seinen-dan, the agitators in support of the Japanese emperor and renunciation of American citizenship. But his diary reveals how the inmates in the stockade transformed their bodily appearance into the image of pro-Japan troublemakers. On December 14th, Inoue wrote to his wife Yuriko, quote, "Everybody in my cell shaved their heads, but I am not shaving my head because it would be bad if I caught a cold," unquote. On December 31st, he wrote, quote, "During the outdoor roll call, it is indescribably cold. The snowflakes land on shaved heads and melt," unquote. On the New Year's Day, the inmates collectively pledged their loyalty to the emperor and held 3 times Tenno Heika Banzai. Inoue proudly joined them. On January 6, upon the failure of the hunger strike, Inoue finally succumbed to the peer pressure and shaved his head. He accepted defeat both in his lonely battle against the shaving of one's head and in the collective failure of hunger strike. after this day, he mostly keeps to himself and reads Saikontan, a 16th century Chinese book of philosophical wisdom. The latter half of the Stockade Diary is filled with his inner thoughts and love for his family. Inoue's diary shows that the detainees in the stockade collectively shaved their heads in resistance against their mistreatment and not necessarily out of their allegiance to the Japanese state. Inoue's resistance against shaving his head, it seems to me, was both a practical decision and his desire not to be pushed around either from the US military nor from the hot-headed pro-Japan factions. Even after he shaved his head, he reads Saikontan and tries to stay calm to maintain his integrity. While his body keeps getting shaped into that of the alien enemy through starvation, sickness, and shaving of his head, he reads, he thinks, and he writes to keep his spiritual peace. Did Inoue show defiance against the US authority because of his wrongful imprisonment and the abuse and violent oppression of the Tule Lake incarcerees and stockade detainees? Yes, without any doubt. Can we say that his bodily transformation into a stereotypical Tule Lake troublemaker was an act of protest against the injustice imposed on his ethnic cohort by the American government and not a demonstration of his loyalty to the Japanese emperor? I have to be cautious to jump to this conclusion because Inoue's diary clearly shows his identification with the Japanese state and the Japanese soldiers in the battlefield and his moral obligation to be a good Japanese person. His anti-American sentiment emerged from his anger towards the American government's racial oppression and the unjust violence against his family and other people of Japanese descent. But his pro-Japan identity was not a product of the American wartime injustice. His dual loyalty constructed who he was as a Kibe judo practitioner. The Tule Lake Stockade Diary is a contemporary account of Inoue's prison life with detailed description of physical conditions in the stockade, as well as the prisoners' interactions with the camp wardens, the FBI, and the military. The diary, on the one hand, reveals how the confined bodies suffered from starvation and sickness, and how the process of alienation proceeded through their physical treatment as troublemakers, underscoring the photographic images familiar to us of alien bodies. On the other hand, the diary reveals a complex process in which the Kibe incarcerees, in reaction to the governmental oppression, produce their bodies as alienated subjects through discursive and active self-expatriation. The diary shows that these collective acts were conducted in the discourse of actions as the honorable subjects of the Empire of Japan, 大日本帝国臣民として。At the same time, Inoue's diary contains his deeply personal feelings towards his family, his philosophy around judo, and his profound contemplation on how to live an honorable life, which transcends any particular national affiliation. And these are the left-hand side, the photograph is Nancy Kyoko Oda and Ernie J. Masako. And then the right-hand side, this is the artwork created by Ernie J. Masako, decades after their incarceration as children. A careful reading of the diary's text, rather than the theoretical deconstruction of photographic representations of the other, is needed to elucidate the complex processes in which alien bodies are constructed. Although this study is at a preliminary stage, such a study may allow us to dig deeper into the incarceration stories of transnational subjects. Thank you.